Hey guys, today I'd like to cover something a little bit different. Um, we're not going to be building anything, and it's not going to be a how-to video, but it is going to be a very informative video. Um, People often wonder what makes a shaft play the way a shaft plays. Um, what characteristics go into a quality shaft? What is a low deflection shaft, and how do you get one? How do you make one? There are I could talk about this for hours, but in a nutshell, I'll try to keep this one sort of limited as far as time. Um, in a nutshell, a shaft is depicted by how many grains per inch the shaft has. What I mean by that is if you turn your shaft toward the joint end and you take a magnifying glass and you count the vertical rings in the shaft, that's what's referred to as rings per inch. Now, with that in mind, the general rule of thumb is the more rings per inch, the stiffer the shaft is going to be, and the more deflection overall you're going to have. On the other end of the spectrum, the fewer grains per inch, the more flexible or whippy the shaft will be, but the less deflection it'll have. Now, um, there's a kind of a happy medium in between, because another thing to consider is the while the less grains per inch is going to give you a little bit more whippy, less deflective shaft overall, it's also going to reduce the power of the shaft. And this is where your power comes from in the shaft. Yeah, your butt plays a part, but the shaft really contributes to how much power the cue can deliver uh, upon impact. Now, ideally, what we look for and what we would strive for is a shaft that is going to give you the best of both worlds. You want something that has a lot of power that you can implement with very little effort, and you want a shaft that is going to give you the ability to reduce deflection, but again, retain that power. And to do that, you have to kind of find your happy middle ground. For me, and the cues that I produce, I like to have a shaft that is between 14 and 16 grains per inch. That kind of gives me the best of both worlds for the cue that I make. It's not too whippy, it's not too stiff, and it's not going to suffer power loss. It's going to retain its energy, and the overall deflection is fair. It's tolerable. Now, you might think to yourself, well, okay, deflection. Why not just go ahead and go with the fewer grains per inch as possible? Well, again, I hit on this earlier. The reason being is because you're not going to have any power in the shaft. You're going to find yourself, uh, or your customers are going to find themselves having to put a lot of effort into making that cue ball move. And uh, you will have more positional ability, but that's more into shaft diameter. I'll get into that in a second. Uh, but overall, you want to have a shaft that kind of falls at halfway for you. Um, Again, I like one that is between 14 and 16 grains per inch, and I think that overall that's a good goal to shoot for. Now, the other thing that we need to hit on is pocketing ability. Okay, and what that will go directly relate into is shaft diameter. Now, if you find yourself in a position to where, and this applies to you as a potential cue maker, this applies to you in the development process of how you'd want to have your shaft. Now, overall, the general rule of thumb is this, and this comes to pocketing balls. If your shaft diameter is on the small side, then you are going to have to be more accurate in your stroke. In other words, if you find yourself hypothetically on a 9 foot diamond table, and you find yourself kind of hanging up balls in the corner pocket where they're just kind of wobbling in the jaws on long shots, well, a larger shaft diameter is going to take care of that problem. You don't change the way you shoot, you don't change the way you stroke, you don't change your stance, you do everything the same. The only thing that you did was change your shaft diameter to a little bit larger shaft diameter. That's going to alleviate that problem of you wobbling balls in the corner pocket. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, the smaller shaft diameter, again, like I mentioned, you have to be more accurate in your aiming, in your stroke. Your stroke has to be more pure. You have to be more precise in your application, in your stroke itself to pocket the ball. Now, also, you have pros and cons to both. While a larger shaft diameter is going to be a more forgiving shaft, and you will pocket more balls, you do sacrifice a little bit of positional ability. And the same thing applies, but opposite, on the other side. The smaller the shaft diameter, the more positional ability you're going to have, but you're going to sacrifice a little bit of pocketing ability, depending on how accurate your stroke is. Now, me, I would much rather be putting balls in the back of the pocket and missing my position by a little bit than getting perfect position and missing the shot. Because if you missed a shot, it didn't matter where you ended up. Now, as far as how we try to achieve low deflection non-naturally and in ways that I mentioned earlier, well, a lot of time you can take this shaft, and some people do. One method is to core out the middle of it, kind of hollow it out, refill it with foam, and take away the weight on the front end, because deflection is directly related to front end mass. So if I took this shaft and I divided it in 3 equal sections, and I just took from here back and just threw it away, well, this is all we're concerned about, the front end, the front third, or 33% of this shaft. Smaller shaft diameters will achieve lower deflection naturally without having to alter the internals of the wood. But again, and keep in mind, all this is related. All of this affects each other. Everything that you do to it is going to affect the other parts. What I mean by that, the benefit of a smaller shaft diameter, say 11.75 or 11.5, yeah, it's going to be a low deflection shaft or lower deflection without having to alter the shaft. But then you go right back into the same thing we just talked about earlier. You have to be more precise on your stroking ability to execute the shots the same way you would with a larger shaft diameter, such as a 13 or even a 12.9, 12.8, 12.75. Now, the other thing that plays a part, and this is again about front end mass and the reduction of it, is your ferrule material and your ferrule length. A long time ago, way back, 30, 40 years ago, 2 things happened. One is 30, 40 years ago, well, 40 years ago, the typical shaft diameter was 14 millimeters. Yep, believe it or not, it was 14 millimeters. That was the most common. And the most common ferrule length was 1.25 inches. Now, today, you look at your typical shaft and you see the average shaft diameter being anywhere from 11.5 to 12.75. Well, that's a big difference from back then, back with what I used to play with when I was competing. Now, another difference that you'll notice is the ferrules are a lot shorter than they used to be back then. And again, it's all related to front end mass and the reduction of it. The shorter the ferrule, no matter what material it is, the shorter the ferrule, the less deflection you're going to have, because it's going to be lighter. Okay, now any material that I know of that you put or use as a ferrule is going to be heavier than the maple itself. So therefore, the shorter you can make that ferrule, the lighter it is. The same thing applies to the tip. Tip, it has weight. If you get a digital scale and you weigh your tips, you want to use the lightest ones you can use for a low deflection situation, whether it be layered or solid, but that's a whole other topic in itself. Overall, the trick will be finding what you want to build to supply to your customers. And if you're a player, same thing applies. This is useful information to you as well. You may go out there and pick up one cue one day and you can't hit the left side of a barn. And then you may find that when you pick up another cue, well, you can't miss. Have you ever thought that it was the shaft diameter or how many grains per inch the shaft had? It's very feasible. And I think that that will help you greatly in your production of cues. And if you're a player, it'll help you decide on which shaft type that you want to get, because not everybody is going to perform well with a low deflection shaft. Some people that have been playing for 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, they may not need a low deflection shaft. And the reason being is because they have spent so much time with a traditional shaft, they've already learned how to compensate for throw or squirt. And then you throw a low deflection shaft in the mix, or LD shaft. You throw a low deflection shaft in the mix. Now, two things are happening. One is that particular individual that's been playing with the shaft for so long, he or she is going to adjust for squirt in their mind, and then the shaft is also going to help adjust for squirt by not allowing it to squirt but so much. So now you have two things, and you have a brand new learning curve. You're probably going to miss most of the balls you shoot at of any length and distance. The up and coming player, sure, give them an LD shaft, less of a learning curve, or less of an adjustment, I should say. Overall, again, this is a dual purpose video. It's for both the cue maker, so you have a better idea of what you're building and when you're supplying it to your customers and why you're building it that way. And also for the player, help you get a better understanding of why shafts are the way they are and why we have so many of them and how it can help you in your game. It's always, this relates to the cue maker, it's always best to understand why we build things the way we do. Why do we have a joint collar? Why do we have a ferrule? Why do we have a tip? What does it do? What does the ferrule do? What's the purpose of the joint collar? And the last thing that I want to hit on is the grain pattern in your shaft. I've already mentioned grains per inch measured from here to here. Now you need to look at the grain pattern or the grain structure. If you look down this cue, like the shaft like this, and you look down this way, then you can see the grains. And if you see the grains that are kind of starting here and then kind of wrapping around the shaft a little bit, that's called grain runout. That's bad. That's not what you're looking for in a quality shaft. What you want to be able to see is when you look down that shaft, you want to be able to see nice straight grains going all the way down. Okay, yeah, they may kind of veer just a little bit like this, but they're not rolling around the shaft. They're staying in one line. Maybe not laser straight, but still in one line. That is going to provide radial consistency to some degree. It's going to give you a better sense of feel and touch when you shoot, because you generate more power from here. It's going to travel through the cue into the joint collar, from the joint collar into the butt cap, and then into the into the butt, and then finally into your grip hand. And that's where you generate touch from. Again, I could talk about this for hours. I was in the shop, I thought about it, I said this would be a good topic, um, and I think it'd be very beneficial to both the player and the cue maker. So if you did find this useful, please like, comment, subscribe, share it. Other people that may find this information useful, please let them see it as well. Tune them in. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. And I just wanted to do a quick video and kind of let you give you information on shafts and why they are the way they are, and what they can and cannot do, and what it could potentially do for your game. And as a cue maker, again, I think this video would help you in deciding what you're looking for in a shaft or in your shaft blanks before you make them. But I appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. If you did find it to be helpful, please let me know in the comments, and I'll do more stuff like this. I'm full of information. I don't mind spilling it out. If you find this information to be helpful and useful to you, whether you're a player or a cue maker, let me know. I will try to add more videos like this in the near future. Again, if it was informative and helpful, please subscribe, like, comment, and let the world know. I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.